Hello there, I'm Lloyd Evans. Welcome back to The Bunker. Yes, I've made my return after many weeks of fleeing earthquakes. Those of you who follow my channel closely will understand that we had to escape for a while due to a large earthquake. We've now ventured back, at least for the time being, to see if we can make a go of living here, even though smaller earthquakes are continuing. So that's a little bit unnerving. But anywho, let's get to the topic at hand, which is hate speech, specifically Jehovah's Witnesses, or the Christian congregation of Jehovah's Witnesses, accusing yours truly of being a hate speech enthusiast. They did this in a letter to IICSA, the Independent Inquiry into Child Sexual Abuse, in a letter dated February 4th, 2020, which had with it a 9-page dossier of examples, statements by Lloyd Evans, inciting religious hatred against Jehovah's Witnesses. I have been working through this dossier in this series. If you want to know more about what gave rise to all of this, please watch earlier episodes in the series. Today, we're going to be looking at the penultimate page of the dossier, which is part 4 on page 8, sweeping statements accusing Jehovah's Witnesses of serious crimes. I wish I had a video so that we could launch into the first example of me making a sweeping statement accusing Jehovah's Witnesses of serious crimes. Unfortunately, there is no such video because the first example on the list is not me. It's a chap named Michel Provost. I'm not kidding. So the example given is Michel, who they've called Michael Provost, saying many pedophile want to know where is the application to become a clergyman. Actually, let me read to you the actual comment, because I've actually gone and dug out the actual comment, which was on the Watchtower in Focus episode 30, Montana Reversed. Michel Provost said, many pedophile want to know where is the application to become clergymen in the JW. Anyone care? ? Any university required or be a window cleaner enough? ? Please respond quickly. They're zealous and willing. Anyway, what is requirement to be a real clergyman in real religion? I'm not kidding. Someone in the legal department of Jehovah's Witnesses, presumably at the Britain branch, has trawled through the comment section of this Watchtower in Focus episode, found this comment, and thought, hey, we've got him. Him being Lloyd Evans. Because he has allowed Michel Provost to make a comment on his video that sort of seems to say pedophiles are welcome to become clergymen for Jehovah's Witnesses. We've got him. This is our slam dunk evidence. We should totally include this in a 9-page dossier of examples. I ask you, viewers, how disingenuous can you get? It's one thing for them to misquote me and put words in my mouth or take words out of my mouth, as they have done in the previous pages of this dossier, as you will see in the previous episodes. But to quote random people, no offense, Michelle, if you're watching, to include quotes from random people as though I've said these words, because the document is headed Statement by Lloyd Evans inciting religious hatred, they would argue, well, we've at least said that it's Michael. who said this. They seem to be clearly banking on IICSA just browsing through the document, seeing something that looks a little bit iffy and thinking, oh, yeah, Lloyd Evans must have said that. That's a problem. But Lloyd Evans didn't say it. Michelle Provost said it. I've never met Michelle Provost. I am not Michelle Provost. I didn't say the things that Michelle Provost said. So why has this been included in a document headed Statements by Lloyd Evans? Statements by Lloyd Evans. There is also a footnote for this example, and it's footnote 15. It is clearly hate speech to state or imply that Jehovah's Witnesses as a religion harbour or welcome persons who commit child sexual abuse, or that children are being molested as a result of their religious beliefs and practices. Okay, well, again, in this particular example, those aren't my words. And also, even if they were my words, I get to criticize Jehovah's Witnesses for their child abuse policies if I want to, if there is reasonable grounds, if I can back up what I'm saying with documented evidence. And I don't say, by the way, that Jehovah's Witnesses as a religion condone child abuse. I'm very careful to make that distinction and have nuance in my arguments where it's appropriate. I don't say that they roll out the red carpet overtly in any way, shape, or form and invite pedophiles to join the religion. In fact, they don't. Let's just say it. They don't invite pedophiles to join the religion specifically. They preach in prisons. They try to attract prison inmates. But even when they're doing that, they're not doing it with a stated purpose of attracting pedophiles into the religion. So I've never said that. I've never said that they welcome persons who commit child sexual abuse. Those, again, are not my words. But when you have documented policies in place involving a database with thousands of perpetrators whose details you are withholding from law enforcement, then yes, it can be said that the leadership, not individual Jehovah's Witnesses, but the leadership, are harbouring people of this sort. And it's not hate speech to say so. I hate to labour the point, but we're still talking about an example that isn't even me talking. But we're now getting to an example where I am talking, and it's from a video that I made in 2019. So it's fascinating for me that, again, this was inevitable. It feels to some degree like karma. And I was debating whether to use this opportunity to send a message to Tony, because it's basically inevitable, isn't it, that he will be watching this very video. So I've debated whether to remind him that shunning is wrong and cruel and immoral, and that if the organisation were to get rid of it, they would actually be doing themselves a favour, because they would make Jehovah's Witnesses more credible as a religion. There would be fewer reasons to call it a cult. This would mean more members could be attracted, even if they may lose a few members who would take the opportunity to escape. I thought about talking about how despicable it is that he and his colleagues are still refusing to implement rudimentary reforms to protect children, that due to his failure to act and his negligence and his covering up of child sex abuse, there are children being molested now, thanks to him and his colleagues. I thought about talking about how his ignorant, uneducated reading of Bible passages on blood and those of his forebears have led to and are leading to the deaths of thousands of his own fellow worshippers. I thought about talking about all of that, but quite frankly, I think that would be falling on deaf ears. So perhaps it would be better to pursue the philosophy of, if you can't beat them, you should join them. So, Tony Morris, cheers. Let's just take a moment, shall we, to savour the fact that Bottlegate, the Bottlegate video, which has now just had a ridiculous number of views. How many views has it had? It's on 182,000 views. A video showing the most pompous, arrogant, narcissistic, judgmental member of the governing body in a less than flattering light has been poured over by Watchtower's legal department in efforts to find something that they can pin on me that might be classed as hate speech. It just gives me no end of pleasure to think of Bethelites as part of their 9-to-5 job. Brother, we need you to watch this video and bear with us. It's not going to make for pleasant viewing. Or you shouldn't find it pleasant viewing. So yeah, they've been watching Bottlegate and they've included Bottlegate in the dossier. I think it's included elsewhere. It is included elsewhere in the dossier, but they didn't like the ending, which I was quite pleased with that ending, actually. Probably one of my better endings on the channel, where I take the opportunity to address some words to Tony Morris directly. I find it difficult to imagine that he's never watched Bottlegate. I knew that when I was making the video that he would almost certainly watch it. And I took the opportunity to call him out on all of those areas of abuse. And I stand by every word of what I said. The man is part of an 8-person leadership that is perpetuating and stubbornly sticking by policies that are right this moment, putting children at risk. And when I say putting children at risk, yes, causing children to be molested who would not otherwise be molested, because the person molesting them would have been processed by law enforcement if not for the fact that Watchtower is keeping their identity from the authorities. That's what I was talking about here. Perfectly coherent, logical, reasonable statement of fact. They're accusing me of making a sweeping statement accusing Jehovah's Witnesses of serious crimes. Both of those elements are wrong, because I wasn't accusing all Jehovah's Witnesses of this. I was specifically directing my comments at the governing body, the leadership of Jehovah's Witnesses, and Tony Morris in particular. I don't say, and never have said, that all Jehovah's Witnesses are covering up abuse. I like to think that the vast majority of Jehovah's Witnesses would be horrified at what's going on if they understood how deep this rabbit hole goes, if they had the slightest clue that this is what's happening, that abuse is being covered up on an industrial scale. As to serious crimes, there's nuance here, because child abuse is a serious crime. I'm not suggesting that Tony Morris is perpetuating this particular crime. I'm not suggesting that he's personally involved in the crime. I'm saying that he is facilitating it. He's what we might say aiding and abetting by allowing these individuals to be withheld from law enforcement. So saying that this is a serious crime, I know that's how many of you will view it, but it's more complicated than that. It's facilitating serious crimes rather than committing serious crimes, which is a very important distinction, which is just glossed over here. Anyway, we need to move on to the next example, which is from a video I made in 2017.
But now let's establish the baseline for the rest of our discussion by making this statement. Jehovah God views the abuse of a child physically, emotionally, or sexually as evil, and we share his view. But now let's narrow our discussion further. Jehovah's Witnesses abhor child sexual abuse.
This is a statement that's repeated so much by Watchtower, especially in media articles exposing examples of where Watchtower has been found covering up child abuse or mishandling accusations of child sex abuse. It's a statement that just gets trotted out every single time Jehovah's Witnesses abhor child abuse, and yet it rings very hollow when you look at what the organisation is actually doing in response to what is unequivocally, without any argument, a disaster in terms of how many have been affected in so many countries. We're seeing case after case after case. I'm convinced that with the lawsuits that I'm aware of, that they're just the tip of the iceberg, because all you need to do is travel a bit and speak to people, in different countries, in different congregations, in different areas on this topic, especially those who have been elders. And you know straight away that it is an epidemic. It's rampant throughout the organization. And it's because of policies that have been written by Watchtower, that are in the Elders Guidebook, that are in Letters to Elders. So this is obviously my rebuttal to the 2017 Don't Give Up convention, specifically the Saturday of the convention, when there was a talk on the issue of child sex abuse, which was apparently intended as some means of putting out fires or reassuring Jehovah's Witness parents that the organization has everything under control. And I had a lot to say about this talk. In this particular example, I'm commenting on this statement, Jehovah's Witnesses abhor child sex abuse, and I'm making the perfectly coherent, reasonable, defensible observation. Well, those words ring quite hollow when you look at what the organization is doing when it comes to covering up child abuse. And I go on to say, or refer to this issue as an epidemic. It is rampant throughout the organization. Well, it is. And actually, 3 years later, more than 3 years later, watching these words, it's actually quite chastening to see me saying, what we're looking at is just the tip of the iceberg, because I feel as though in the 3 years that have elapsed, I've seen a little bit more of the iceberg. I got more of a taste of just how widespread this problem is. I mean, bear in mind, JW Watch are receiving emails constantly on this subject, many from victims of abuse. A lot of the stories that we can't talk about because maybe it's a survivor or a victim who isn't yet at a place where they can describe what's happened to them or pursue legal action, file a report with the police to make sure other children are protected. There are any number of variables that need to come together for a case of abuse to be even something that you can talk about. And when you think about how many stories we can talk about, because all of those variables just happen to have fallen together, the victim's able to describe their ordeal, the perpetrator has been prosecuted, or the organization has been on the receiving end of civil action, when you think about the number of cases there are like that, where we're able to talk about it, and you bear in mind that usually when we're talking about child sex abuse, it's a relative who's involved. And for fairly obvious reasons, in many cases, there'll be immense pressure on a victim to stay quiet if it's someone in their household. It's a very big iceberg. And I put it very, if anything, I was understating the issue there. But apparently saying anything on this issue or exposing the mishandling of abuse by Jehovah's Witnesses in any way, shape or form is hate speech. It's sweeping statements accusing Jehovah's Witnesses of serious crimes. Again, there's nuance here. I'm not accusing all Jehovah's Witnesses of covering up abuse. I'm directing my comments at the leadership, and I'm not accusing the leadership of serious crimes per se. I'm accusing them of facilitating a situation where serious crimes are being covered up. But it doesn't help the legal department, does it, for there to be any nuance? They wanted me off IICSA. They wanted me removed as a core participant. And when we're dealing with cults, the ends always justify the means. It was anything goes. They just wanted me off, and they were willing to bend the truth and in some cases outright lie in order to achieve those ends. But we move on to our next example. Actually, we can't move on to the next example, at least in video form, because it's again a case of someone else's comment being listed on a document titled Statements by Lloyd Evans. This one is a comment from Rob C. Here is the part of the document where Rob C. is quoted. Well, who in Montana is getting kickbacks from Watchtower? Corruption going on there for sure. It says, comment by Rob C. See comment by Peter Brooks. I didn't bother to find the comment by Peter Brooks because they haven't bothered to show his comment, but they have bothered to include the words of Rob C. in, again, a document headed Statements by Lloyd Evans. So I've fished out Rob C.'s comment. Here it is in all its glory. Apparently, Watchtower's legal department were fishing through the comment section on episode 30, Montana Reversed, Watchtower in Focus, assuming that this would prove me to be a hate speech enthusiast. Ah, yes. Rob C. there has suggested that the Montana Supreme Court are getting kickbacks from Watchtower. There's corruption going on. And if Rob C. is saying it and Lloyd Evans is allowing him to say this on YouTube, even though I don't own YouTube, I'm not responsible for comments on YouTube. I just make videos and let people comment on them. They've somehow decided that this is a slam dunk case of me making a sweeping statement accusing Jehovah's Witnesses of serious crimes. It's not me. It's Rob C. And I actually have never said anything of this sort. I don't think that there was any corruption going on there. I realise many people did feel that way, or they suspected that that might be the case. There was a lot of frustration when the appeal court overturned this decision in the Montana lawsuit. But the simple truth of it is, the way the law is written when it comes to reporting, there is this caveat that clergy can basically do what they like. Clergy can have their confidentiality, their clergy penitent privilege. Watchtower leveraged this part of the legislation that's been written with the churches, with Babylon the Great in mind. They leveraged this to get out of the judgment in this case or to reverse it, that case has since been resurrected in a different light, and we'll be doing another Watchtower in Focus on that at some point. Bottom line, I have never said on my channel that there was corruption or that Watchtower was involved in corruption, because I don't think that. I'd have to think it in order to say it. And I can't be held accountable or responsible in any way, shape or form for what random people who I've never met, no offence, Rob C., for what people I've never met are saying on my videos. It's really shady as far as I'm concerned. If you're going to write a document and call it Statements by Lloyd Evans, you'd better make it exclusively Statements by Lloyd Evans. But in fact, there are 3 examples in the examples that they give in the entire document of where they include a comment that someone's left either in the comments section or in the live chat. So that's that example out of the way. We now move on to a video that I produced in 2019. But conventions are for all Jehovah's Witnesses to attend, but you also have what are known as international conventions, of which there's only, I'm going to say, a couple of dozen globally. The idea being that a governing body member will be present at one of these international conventions. So it's a huge honor to be selected as a delegate, basically a representative, to attend one of these conventions, where you will most likely get at least some opportunity to either see or be with a governing body member. And to be a delegate, you have to go through, and not only do you have to go through an application process where you give details about your morality and about your standards as a witness. You have to be whiter than white, not just in good standing, but in very good standing. You also need to be willing to part with a lot of money. We're talking thousands of dollars potentially, because Watchtower insists that you book your flights and accommodation. I'm going to qualify that. In most cases, to be a delegate, Watchtower insists that you book your travel and accommodation through them, because Watchtower reaches their own arrangements with hotels in the host city and with the airlines. And you would think that this would make it cheaper for the delegate, but in many cases it seems to be either as expensive or more expensive than it would be if you were to make your own arrangements. And almost certainly what's happening is that Watchtower is taking a large cut on the amount of money that delegates are coughing up in order to attend these special events where they get to rub shoulders potentially with a governing body member. So it's a little bit of a racket, quite frankly. And because delegates are such a huge cash cow for the organization, they get this preferential treatment, which involves being taken on tours of the host city and attending these entertainment evenings, an example of which we've just seen there in Miami, where they're being entertained with kingdom music, not just, again, the casual contemporary kind that you see on the JW Broadcasting episodes, but in the example that we've just seen, the more formal ritual songs have been adapted into kind of a more catchy, dancey beat. So to give you a bit more context, this is a video, again, from 2019 called Dancing for Jehovah. And it was dealing with this bizarre subculture in the Jehovah's Witness religion when they have these international conventions, which, as you've heard, are basically opportunities to be in the same venue or in the same vicinity as a governing body member. When these happen, the rules suddenly get relaxed when it comes to entertainment and music and what you can or can't do in a kingdom hall. because there are delegates to entertain. And so I'm explaining why delegates are so important, why it might be that the rules can be bent so that you can have, for example, brothers line dancing on a Kingdom Hall platform, or kingdom melodies, hymns essentially, that are sacred to Jehovah's Witnesses, that are part of their worship, being reinvented into these kind of dancey musical numbers. It's all very bizarre, but the point I'm making there is simple. Of course, there's a cut that's being taken by Watchtower when they have control over all the airline costs and over all of the hotel deals. Of course, they're going to take a cut. And I was speaking from personal experience because my father, I think he's attended multiple special or international conventions at this point. And I vividly remember him attending one in Prague when I was still a witness. And he told me how much it had cost, bearing in mind Prague is on the same continent. So it's not like he was flying to Australia or something. But I remember him telling me how much his trip was costing. I was floored. I thought there's no way in the world that it costs that much money to go to Prague for 3 or 4 days or however it was. But it makes sense when you consider that Watchtower is booking the hotels, Watchtower is booking the flights, and they make it so that if you're a delegate from a wealthy country, I don't think they do this with some of the poorer countries where the witnesses aren't likely to be as wealthy, but certainly the wealthier countries, yes, they make you pay through the roof. And I describe the whole thing as, quote, a little bit of a racket, quite frankly. This is hate speech. This is me making a sweeping statement accusing Jehovah's Witnesses of serious crimes. That's one of the most obvious things I've said of that nature in all of my years of making videos. My channel has been up since 2012. I've been vlogging since 2013. So in all of these years of vlogging, this was one of the most compelling examples they could find of me making a sweeping statement accusing Jehovah's Witnesses, again, the religion rather than just the leadership, accusing Jehovah's Witnesses of serious crimes. And before we move on, there is a footnote I should add, although it's not a very well-worded footnote, or it deteriorates into just quoting from various lawsuits. But here is the footnote. The Grand Chamber of the European Court of Human Rights has also held that the use of virulent terms which falsely accuse an individual or organization of the criminal offense of running a scam or of bribery violate, I've never said anything about bribery, violate Article 10 of the Convention. So make of that what you will, viewers. Have I used a virulent term? Have I accused Jehovah's Witnesses of a serious crime? Is it hate speech? Let me know what you think in the comments. But we must move on to our final example from this page, which is taken from a video I made in 2018.
As the meeting progressed with Mr. Wall, the elders came to the decision that Mr. Wall was not sufficiently repentant for his disgraceful conduct, and the congregation elders took the decision to disfellowship him. That word is used by Jehovah's Witnesses. Jehovah's Witnesses don't use the word shun or shunning. They refer to it as disfellowship, disfellowshipping, disfellowshipped, because that really gives the sense of what's taking place within this particular religious community. Disfellowship literally means no further spiritual fellowship with the individual. And as I point out Sorry, Chief Justice. As I point out at paragraph 22 of my factum, the nature of the relationship then of a disfellowshipped person is not completely shunned. The disfellowshipped person is able to come into the congregation, to the congregation meetings. They're able to attend in the Kingdom Hall of Jehovah's Witnesses. They're able to sit wherever they like. They can sing the spiritual songs with the congregation. As far as their family members are concerned, normal family relations continue with the exception of spiritual fellowship. And the door is not closed to Mr. Wall either. The person who is disfellowshipped can, after a period of time, ask to be reinstated in the congregation, because that's the purpose of the discipline.
I'm not going to mince my words here. What David Gnam has just said to the Canadian Supreme Court in his official capacity as a lawyer is an outright lie. And it well illustrates the strategy that I've already detailed that's outlined in Watchtower publications of both evasion and deception. And we've seen both of those here. David Gnam uses evasion by talking about the fact that disfellowshipped people can attend meetings. Oh, well, they can come to the Kingdom Hall and they can receive instruction. But what he's missing out is that, and while they're at the Kingdom Hall, they will be shunned. So those disfellowshipped people who attend Kingdom Hall meetings are literally being shunned by an entire congregation.
Meillä on siellä sitten lakiosasto, joka nimenomaan sanoo, että nyt se ensimmäinen tehtävä, mikä teidän on, niin pitää kertoa viranomaisille. Tämä on nimenomaan sen takia just, että se varmasti menee viranomaisille.
Okei, mä vielä jankkaan, koska mä katsoin tätä ohjeistusta, niin mä ymmärsin, että ei siinä sanota noin, Ari, että siinä sanotaan, että pitää nimenomaan olla yhteydessä haaratoimistoon. Ei sanota siinä, että ottakaa yhteyttä viranomaisiin. Siinä missä lue, että ottakaa viranomaisiin. Miksi ette kehota ottamaan yhteyttä viranomaisiin?
On meidän julkaisussa ollut jo aikaisemmin jo niin kuin pidemmältä ajalta ollut ohjeet ottaa viranomaisiin, mutta se...
Missä julkaisussa teillä on sitten semmoisia ohjeita?
Vartiotonnissa.
Jos ihmiset ei lue jotain vartiotonnia, että kun teillä on omat ohjeet kuitenkin.
Tämä on sikäli niin kuin mielenkiintoista, että mä uskon, että tämä on aika lailla kaikille Jehovan todistajille selvää, että jos... Siis tapaukset on tosi harvinaisia. Todella harvinaisia.
So again, in this example, you have both evasion and outright deception, an outright lie. So Ari is defending the organization to Suzanne, and if it means talking about current policy as though it's applicable everywhere and as though it's always been applicable, he is more than comfortable doing that. But Ari also employs theocratic warfare strategy in this interview by telling an outright lie when he says that Watchtower publications have repeatedly told parents or victims to go to the authorities. This apparently, if you look up child abuse or child molestation in the magazines or in the literature, you're going to find apparently articles or pages that tell victims to go to the police. I'm sorry, but while you can say that Watchtower has published a tremendous amount of material on child sex abuse going back a number of decades, which apparently makes the organisation more culpable, in my view, because if they've been warning about child sex abuse going all the way back to the 80s, they can't then argue that this whole thing has taken them by surprise and they're struggling to adapt, because they've been talking about it for all these decades. They should be on top of the situation. But one thing that you cannot say about Watchtower material on child abuse is that it warns victims or parents of victims to go to the authorities. I would ask, if you're watching this as a Jehovah's Witness, don't take my word for it. Go and look at the material itself and see if you can find a sentence or a paragraph that tells victims to go to the police. That's my challenge for you. But just to indicate or give some hint of the fact that you will not find that, I'm going to show you Questions Young People Ask, Answers That Work, Volume 1. This was published, let me see, in 2011 this came out. So this is fairly recent material published for young people. It has an entire section, how can I protect myself from sexual predators? So you'd think this would be the section, wouldn't you, where it says if you are attacked by a sexual predator, what you need to do is go to the police or go to the authorities. Guess what? That's not what it says. So you have a section here telling your story, and it talks about going to the elders. So it says, in fact, if you are a Christian, it is important that you speak to a congregation elder about what happened. If you flick on, it talks about speaking to supportive friends. It speaks about taking care of yourself physically and emotionally. Get needed rest. It says, rely on Jehovah, the God of all comfort, who will soon bring about a new world in which evildoers themselves will be cut off. What you will not find anywhere, and believe me, you can check for yourself. Read this whole section. Nowhere does it say, go to the authorities, go to the police. Make sure that this sexual predator is brought to justice so that he doesn't attack anyone else, which is the whole point of reporting, to make sure that the awful tragedy isn't replicated again and again and again. But going back to Ari's interview with Suzanne, he tells the bold-faced lie that in material such as this, it tells victims of abuse to go to the authorities when it just doesn't. So there are two things really I want to talk about here. First of all, is lying a serious crime? And second of all, has Watchtower quoted me honestly here? Or have they put words in my mouth? Have they been dishonest, ironically, in quoting what I've said in a video that is literally about how the organization lies, employs theocratic warfare, misrepresents its beliefs when it suits them, so that it can wriggle out of awkward situations? So first question, is lying a serious crime? Because let's not forget the heading that we're discussing is sweeping statements accusing Jehovah's Witnesses, all Jehovah's Witnesses, of serious crimes. Again, I'm not talking about all Jehovah's Witnesses. I'm talking about individuals who are Jehovah's Witnesses, namely David Gnam, who appears to be a lawyer, and some chap named Ari, who was being interviewed by the media. Is it a serious crime to lie? I would argue, not really. It's extremely dishonest. It's especially reprehensible when we're talking about an organization that literally calls itself the truth and has the gall to point the finger at former members like me and accuse us of lying. It's hypocritical in the extreme for them to do that. But how can you call lying in and of itself a serious crime? Now, with the representative in Finland, Ari, he was speaking to the media. What he said was wrong regarding publications of Jehovah's Witnesses urging parents to go to the police, and I'll have a bit more to say about that later. But was it a serious crime for him to lie to a journalist? Again, no. So what's that got to do with the heading? With David Gnam, it's a little bit more complicated because he is a lawyer and was speaking before the Canadian Supreme Court. So the question arises as to whether he was guilty of perjury. I am not a legal expert, and I happen to know that there are certain instances when you might be involved in a legal proceeding, and because perhaps you're not under oath, or because of the particular rules regarding that stage of the legal proceeding, you can basically say whatever you like and not be guilty of perjury. It would take someone with legal knowledge to say definitively whether David Gnam was guilty of perjury, but I wasn't commenting on whether he was guilty of perjury, at least not in the clip that we've seen. I was making the perfectly reasonable and defensible observation that he was lying. And he was lying, because he was saying that when someone is disfellowshipped, normal relations with the family remain intact. Well, you don't need me to explain, viewers, do you? Especially those of you who are Jehovah's Witnesses or have been Jehovah's Witnesses. You don't need me to explain why that's a lie. All I will say is that I have been disassociated from Jehovah's Witnesses for years now, and in all that time, I can tell you I have not had normal relations, normal family relationships of any kind with certainly my father, who has yet to meet his 2 grandchildren. So I have personal first-hand knowledge, not just theoretical knowledge, but first-hand knowledge, testifying to how much David Gnam was lying there. And hopefully, if you were watching this footage for the first time, if you hadn't seen the video before, you'll be as horrified as I was when I first saw it, to see, again, someone representing Jehovah's organization, which, again, has the audacity to call itself the truth, resorting to that sort of underhanded behavior. Second point, was I quoted fairly? You might have noticed during the initial viewing that a 14-second segment is missing from the quote. So in the paragraph, I'm quoted as saying, what David Gnam has just said to the Canadian Supreme Court in his official capacity as a lawyer is an outright lie. David Gnam uses evasion. No full stop, no ellipses. They miss out 14 seconds of me saying, as a lawyer, is an outright lie. And it well illustrates the strategy that I've already detailed, that's outlined in Watchtower publications, of both evasion and deception. And we've seen both of those here. David Gnam uses evasion. David Gnam uses evasion, and the quote continues. You can understand, can't you, why the legal department wouldn't want those 14 seconds in the quote? Can't you? You can understand why that might weaken their argument slightly. To have that sort of clear explanation of what I'm talking about in my quote. But they, and they did this in the previous episode, you'll remember, they are effectively putting words in my mouth when they change my words by taking out words that I've said and not even giving any indication that they might have taken out words that I've said, because they don't even include the ellipses. It's just a space and then the next sentence. So ironically, again, dealing with material that is exposing the Jehovah's Witness organization for its use of theocratic warfare, for its willingness to lie when the ends justify the means, they do it again. They lie to IICSA, to a statutory inquiry about what I have or haven't said, with the aim of getting me thrown off as a core participant. That's Jehovah's organization for you folks. That's the truth. This is what they're capable of. They also butcher my words in the next example regarding this chap in Finland called Ari. I'm sorry, I can't remember his surname, and I'd probably mispronounce it even if I did remember it. But if you look at the paragraph in the document, you'll notice right at the end of the paragraph, it says, articles or pages that tell victims to go to the police, ... when it just doesn't. Let's play that. Articles or pages that tell victims to go to the police. I'm sorry, but while you... Now we're in the ... and it's not until much, much later when I finally complete this when it just doesn't. Victims of abuse to go to the authorities when it just doesn't. The intervening period was nearly 3.5 minutes. So some dude in a suit and tie in Watchtower's legal department, what were they even thinking? What was their mental process? I'd love to speak to them about this. I mean, obviously I have lots of things to say to them, but in this particular instance, I'm fascinated to know what was going through their minds when they were sitting through nearly 3.5 minutes of footage, just cutting it all out and waiting for me to say when it just doesn't, just so that they could add 4 words on the end of what I'd previously been saying. What an odd way. Again, totally butchering my words, getting rid of all of the explanatory material where I'm saying, look, I'll even show you. Let me show you from the Young People Ask book. Here's an example of where they could have said or should have said, go to the police. You're a victim of abuse, go to the police, let the police deal with it. But in an actual chapter in the Young People Ask book, dealing with this exact issue of child sex abuse and what young people ought to do, it's, pray to Jehovah, speak to the elders, find a trusted friend. They mention almost everyone that you could think of, and not the police. And this guy, Ari, in Finland, this spokesperson, had the gall to, again, they're accusing us of being liars, let's remember, viewers. Or they're accusing activists like myself of being mentally diseased, corrupted of mind, of telling false stories. If it's 10% correct, it's 100% misleading. We're the bird catchers. We're the ones who are using lies and trickery to mislead people. And here we have a video where I'm giving 4 examples of Watchtower representatives, including a governing body member, outright lying, either to the media or in a legal process. And in this instance, a Watchtower representative in Finland has the audacity to say, for decades we've been telling victims to go to the police in our publications. He specifically said the publications, the literature. You just can't say that because it's not true. And interestingly, I was thinking about this. We had this come up in IICSA, which obviously this is all about because CCJW was trying to get me thrown off IICSA, but there was a bit of a to and fro between the core participants who were ex-Jehovah's Witnesses, namely myself and the advocates group, and Paul Gillies, who was representing CCJW. We each submitted, I think, 3 or 4 evidence documents or statements, some of which dealt with each other's arguments. Mostly, as I recall, Paul Gillies was kind of ignoring my arguments completely. But in his statement, he presented what he considered evidence that for decades, Jehovah's Witnesses have been encouraging parents and abuse survivors or victims to go to the authorities. None of the quotes that he presented said any such thing. And this was fascinating for me because I was a core participant who was working essentially for free. I mean, I'm supported by my patrons, but IICSA wasn't paying me to do any of the work. And I was it was taking me weeks to put my evidence together. I can only imagine how long it was taking Paul Gillies to put his statement together, although he probably had the benefit of a team working under him. In any case, whoever was responsible for their statements, they had decades worth of material, of publications to trawl through, looking for, I'm guessing, search terms such as child abuse or predator or what have you. They had the opportunity to find an example to support, any example, to support what Ari was saying here. Oh, for decades we've been telling parents and children to go to the authorities. They made it their task to find these examples for IICSA. They couldn't. They found one example from the April 8th, 1997 Awake, where I'll put a page number in a caption. It's an Awake correspondent who is reporting on a congress that was to do with child sex abuse and basically just commenting on what was said. And one of the things that was said that gets included in this Awake article is the statement, of course, children should also be warned about and urged to report to authorities any person making improper advances toward them, including people they know. That was, out of all of their quotes, the only one that came anywhere near suggesting that parents or children or abuse survivors ought to go to the authorities rather than going to the elders, rather than praying about it or whatever. But when you actually look at it, well, first of all, it's not in a Watchtower article that's giving guidance to congregations on how to deal with matters. It's reporting on a worldly event that's touching on or dealing with child safeguarding. They're reporting on what was said, and also they're not expressly talking about the crime of child sex abuse. They're talking about people who, quote, make improper advances. If someone makes an improper advance, you should report it to the authorities. That's nowhere near what you would need in an organization like Jehovah's Witnesses, where you need to be telling parents and victims, if you're abused or if someone tries to abuse or molest you, you need to report them to the police straight away. This was the closest they got. So just astonishing that even when they've tried so hard to back up what Ari was saying in that video, they've expended resources, time and energy, trawling through their literature, trying to find something that they can use to present to IICSA and say, look, all along we've been telling parents and children to do this. And this was the most compelling thing that they could find. Everything else, all of the other examples, and you can download Paul Gillies' statements from the IICSA website, so don't just take my word for it. You can read it for yourself. None of the other examples had anything that even remotely suggested go to the authorities if you're abused. And this one was purely talking about people who make improper advances. So fairly vague and unspecific. But anyway, we've reached the end of page or part 4 of the hate speech dossier. Coming up in our final episode, we will be moving on to part 5, profane and offensive statements about God, Jesus, and the Bible. Spoiler alert, it turns out if you openly express atheism, you are guilty of hate speech. Who knew? So all of that to come in part 7 of this series, but I hope you have found this video interesting. It's good to be back in the bunker, so look out for more bunker videos in the weeks ahead. But that's it. Don't forget to subscribe to the Lloyd Evans channel for more such videos. And as always, thank you for watching.